Welcome to the Roosevelt Community Center. I'm Casey Fitzgerald, the Interim Deputy Director for the Watershed Protection Division of our Environmental Services Department. Happy to have you here tonight as we talk about our green stormwater infrastructure plan. While the plan is still in development, we thought that this was a good opportunity to get members of the community together with some of our city departments to talk about how our plan is going to work to improve stormwater quality and leverage other benefits to the community. We will have a couple presentations tonight. Can you hear me okay? We will have a couple of presentations. Oh, here we go. Whoa. Can everyone hear me now? Okay, great. Great, thanks. So we will have a few presentations tonight. You will have time during these presentations to ask questions. We'll also have some time after the presentations if you want to get some follow-up information. Before we begin, I wanted to just acknowledge the city staff that are here today. So from our Environmental Services Department, we have Jeff Sinclair, we have Sharon Newton, Vitaly Litvinikos on the camera, and then Aaron Kinney's. I don't know where you at, Aaron. Aaron's over there. From Parks, I'm sorry, we have Nicole Burnham. And then from Public Works, we have Matthew Nguyen and Matt Kano is here tonight. Thank you, Matt. And then from DOT, Thomas Eddy should be in. So with that, I wanted to pass it over to Michelle Young, who's going to be our facilitator today. She'll help to walk us through and answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to do a sound check with my own voice. Is that okay, or do you prefer the mic? The mic, you got it. Okay. Keeps me in a corner, which means I'll lose this eventually, but not right this second.
Okay, good. And we still have folks coming in, so that will continue to happen. And so again, to reiterate what Casey said, I want to welcome you all here. We're really excited to be presenting some of the initial thoughts on the plan that's in development for stormwater green infrastructure, and to answer any of the questions that you have tonight. We have a short period of time, so I want you all to consider, we have an hour and a half, but I want you all to consider this really the conversation getting established. So we're starting this conversation, which will continue on through the development of the plan, through the feasibility and finalization of some of the projects that you're going to hear about today, which will go on for a long period of time. But we want you to understand that there will be opportunities for you to ask questions tonight. Leave questions with us if they are not questions that we can answer within the time that we have, and we will follow up on those. And then there will also be opportunities for you to be in touch with us online. So I want to make sure that everybody sometime this evening leaves us their email address in the sign-up sheet, so that we have a way to reach out to you and let you know when materials are put online for you to comment on, ask questions about, etc. So this will be an ongoing dialogue as the plan is developed and as some of the projects are reviewed for their feasibility and decisions are made about whether the projects will be implemented or not. Okay, so it's the starting point of a process. So just wanted to let you know about that. So tonight, let's see. Excellent. So tonight, again, we have about an hour and a half together for this first conversation. And what we will be doing is we'll be having some presentations, PowerPoint presentations from some of the staff that's involved with the development of the plan, and they will go through some of the features of the plan and some of the ideas that we are working on amongst the city departments that are working together on this project. And within the presentation, there will be times for you to ask questions as we're moving along in the presentation. And then afterwards, we will also have an opportunity to collect questions and answer questions. So if not all of your questions get answered tonight, we will be capturing them both on the the post-it papers as well as on video. So this meeting is being videotaped tonight. Again, in order to really capture the essence of what all of you guys are sharing and asking, so that we can make sure that the follow-up that we have answers your questions, but also that we're considering that input as we continue to develop this plan. Okay, so just make sure that we have your email and we can do that. So as you can see, we'll be talking about some of the stormwater, we have a new name, so the Stormwater Green Infrastructure Plan Development, and so those PowerPoints will happen, and then you'll have time to ask questions. In terms of logistics, beautiful Roosevelt Community Center, one of our green building gems in our city. Restrooms are right outside this door here. We are not gonna have a scheduled break, so we will not have a 15-minute period of time where everybody gets up and takes a break. If you need to take a break, then you can just do that during the meeting time. And similarly, if we're moving along in the presentation and there is a clarification that you want, please do raise your hand and let the presenter know that you'd like a clarification on the slide that they're on, so they don't go too much farther into that. So a little bit later in the process, I'll be helping with capturing questions. But at this point, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Sharon Newton, and she's going to start to talk to you about the background and overview of the plan that's being developed.
All right, bear with me. Michelle's a little taller than I am.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. How's that? Okay. I might need to move and turn a little bit, so if I lose sound and forget what I'm doing, just remind me. Okay, as Michelle said, I'm going to start out with some high-level overview, background, introductory type of information. So we'll start out with, where does the water go? And in San Jose, we have two separate sewer systems. For indoor activities like flushing, toilet flushing, washing the dishes, or even in industrial settings where they're using water, that water, it goes into the sanitary sewer system.
Very hard to read the graph. It's very vague.
Is there a way to darken the room a little bit?
You can darken the whole room, but not the front lights.
Is that okay, darkening the entire room? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna keep going because there aren't a lot of words on this slide. So in terms of indoor activities, dishwashing, toilet flushing, etc., all of these indoor activity water goes into the sanitary sewer system. And from there, it's transported to the regional wastewater facility where it's treated prior to being discharged into the bay. So the important word to hang on to there is that it's treated. Whereas in the second row, outdoor activities like car washing, irrigation, or just rainwater falling down, that water is collected through the second system, the storm sewer system. And again, it's separate from the sanitary sewer system, and that's not the case in all cities, but it is the case in our city. And from there, the water goes into our storm drain inlets, and it is transported directly to our local waterways, including places like Guadalupe River and Coyote Creek, which then in turn carry that water to the San Francisco Bay. And just for the sake of clarifying and making sure that I use these terms interchangeably perhaps throughout the presentation, I want to make it clear. Stormwater is the same as rainwater. And when that rainwater falls, a number of things can happen, but there are two primary things that can happen. It can either infiltrate, soak into the ground, or it can run off, as I kind of described a little earlier. So just to give you a little more explanation on that, and I realize some of you probably already know this, but for those who don't, in areas like Coyote Valley, where we've got a lot of undeveloped space, rainwater will tend to infiltrate. However, in urban areas like we're in now, there's a lot of impervious surfaces like asphalt, concrete, and that causes the water to run off. So what are the impacts of, I'm sorry. Thank you. So what are the impacts of unmanaged stormwater? So when that stormwater runs off from rain or other outdoor activities that we talked about, it flows into the storm drain and can pick up pollutants along the way, like trash, oil and grease, metals from cars, pesticides that people might be using on their lawns. And introduction of those pollutants into local creeks can result in things like habitat degradation and can cause harm to the creatures that live there, such as fish. Also, because we've got so much impervious surfaces and we don't have the natural conditions where the water can soak in, we're sending more water to the creek at a faster rate. And that can have impacts, as you see in that middle picture there. It can cause channel instability and erosion and habitat degradation. So what is green stormwater infrastructure? Green infrastructure represents systems that use vegetation, soil, and natural processes to manage water and create healthier urban environments. Examples include things like bioretention cells that are sometimes referred to as rain gardens, green roofs, rainwater harvesting, and permeable pavers. And you see pictures of all of these exemplified here. You see the alleyway. There's a darker strip down the middle, and that's where the permeable pavers are that allow the water to pass through them. And then there's an example above that of a green roof. And then we've probably seen these, I see these all the time at the new shopping centers. They've got the bioretention rain garden set up. And then in that bottom corner there, at the bottom, you'll see a rainwater harvesting system where the rainwater is collected and used. So there are multiple types of or categories of green infrastructure projects, and they're listed here. Low impact development, green streets, and what we refer to as regional projects. So the first, low impact development. This is a concept that if we're designing new and redevelopment to mimic natural hydrology so that water can infiltrate. So all of these types of green infrastructure will function differently, but ultimately we're looking to promote infiltration. And the stormwater permit requires all existing and planned public and private projects that exceed a certain size to include these low impact development features. And low impact development is designed to treat the development project or redevelopment project areas, so parcel base, it's parcel base. An example shown in this picture again are the bioretention, reuse, and permeable pavers. The next category is green streets, and these are designed to capture runoff from the street and sometimes the surrounding properties. And they're typically located in the public right-of-way, as illustrated on the slide, and they are built into existing or planned improvements. The Green Street features shown can include things again like rain barrels. There's a picture of a rain barrel, I think it's labeled number 1, and that is showing how it can be placed below a disconnected downspout to collect water. And then you'll see bioretention examples. There's one in a curb extension, and there's one in a planter, and then a permeable alleyway. That's the illustration of the car parked on it. And then finally, regional projects. And these are designed to capture larger areas. Whereas a Green Street project might treat a street or maybe 2, a regional project can collect from a drainage area that covers multiple neighborhoods. And again, it's designed to divert runoff from existing storm drains. And these can come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and you'll see some samples of projects that have been either implemented or planned for other cities. They could be above ground, and provide multiple uses, sometimes in the parks. And you can see one here that shows a couple here that show water features. Or they can be underground and serve as places to store water and then reuse it further for irrigation purposes. So what are the benefits of green infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure? They can improve water quality, slow down the flow. I talked about how the flow can be faster in these areas because we've developed them and we have so much impervious surface. They can provide climate benefits, such as reducing the heat island effect by having some greenery in the middle of a place that's surrounded by impervious surfaces. Groundwater recharge, as well as wildlife habitat. So those are the environmental benefits that I just read off. But in terms of community benefits, it can include some urban greening and beautification. You can see an example here. There's this nice little roundabout, and I believe that's a bioretention facility. But it's prettier than just a cement circle. It's a cement circle with some greenery in the middle of it now. It can, in some cases, help reduce localized flooding. And it can improve walkability. In that lower illustration, you see how the bioretention serves as a barrier between the sidewalk where people can walk and the flow of traffic. And these can help with traffic safety improvements. You may have seen, and I think I have a picture coming up, where these can serve, bioretention can be put in bulb outs that can help slow down traffic in certain areas. So in considering green infrastructure projects, there are some factors that have to be taken into consideration. In terms of siting, we have to look at the grading, utility complex, as well as land ownership. And we have to take into consideration that there may be space restrictions in the right-of-way or on the street, as well as sizing these things. They have to be sized a certain size. They have to be sized such that they can appropriately treat the area that's drained to them. And then, of course, the other considerations such as parking, bike and pedestrian traffic, and just the fact that, again, the lane width is something that may provide a factor that we have to consider. Is there space for this thing? Okay, so now down to the subject that you all came to hear about tonight, the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan. What is this? It's a document intended to describe how the city will shift from our traditional approach to stormwater management to implementing green stormwater infrastructure, so that we're not sending everything down the street into the storm drain, but we're actually able to treat some of the runoff through this green stormwater infrastructure. And the photos above, not above my nose, but on the side, they show you the contrast between traditional storm sewer system that we talked about versus a green infrastructure approach. So you see the storm drain inlet on one side, and then the other, shows you a curb cut that allows the water to run into a bioretention facility. So the plan is also intended to show some reasonable assurance that that will be improving water quality. So the term green infrastructure, we quickly learned that it's used not only by stormwater people, but it's also used by others, and it means different things to different people. So actually we learned that it's a term that's used for open space in some cases. So it differs from green stormwater infrastructure. Open space does, because Green stormwater infrastructure addresses stormwater runoff from urban environments that can contribute to degradation of local creeks in the bay that I've already mentioned. So the goal of green stormwater infrastructure is to mimic the natural drainage that you see demonstrated on the slide here, where water can infiltrate to the extent feasible, but through engineered methods. And by doing this, we can help reduce pollutants and infiltrate water in urban areas. And the illustration here, the slide with GSI and without GSI, you can see the process difference. Whereas without GSI, the water is running directly into the storm sewer system, whereas with GSI, it runs into that little, I think it's a viral retention, runs into the viral retention and it's treated and either infiltrated or runs into the storm sewer system after being treated. So if you recall back at the beginning, I talked about the wastewater versus the stormwater, and the difference being that the wastewater from the indoor uses, that went to a treatment facility and was treated, whereas stormwater just goes into the bay untreated. So why are we putting together a green infrastructure plan? What are the drivers? So there are a few drivers. The first is the city is under a municipal regional stormwater permit, and that permit applies to most cities in the Bay Area. There are some that have different kinds of systems and they're not covered under it. And in that permit, it requires us to develop a green infrastructure plan, and it lays out some of the elements that need to be included within that plan, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. So I talked about the different types of green infrastructure. The first one I mentioned was the parcel-based LID, or low impact development. That's been in place for a long time, and public and private projects have been subject to that requirement for several years. The new part of this is this green infrastructure plan that will be looking more broadly and specifically at treating runoff from the right of way. Second driver is a consent decree between the city of San Jose and the San Francisco Baykeeper. And the consent decree, the San Francisco Baykeeper is a non-governmental organization that addresses and is watching how they can help improve the environment and help cities to do the same. So in that consent decree, the city is required to develop a plan. It's a plan of a different name. It's called the Comprehensive Load Reduction Plan. But the requirements of that plan significantly overlap with the requirements of the green stormwater infrastructure plan required by the stormwater permit. So rather than having two documents, we decided to create one document that incorporates the requirements of both. And then finally, the green infrastructure plan, or green stormwater infrastructure plan, aligns with the direction that the city is moving with initiatives such as the general plan, our San Jose Climate Smart, and yeah. So, are there any questions at this point on what I've talked about so far? Yes.
When you mention or reference baykeepers.org, I imagine? Baykeepers.org?
Yes.
Repeat the question so we hear it.
Yes.
So far he said, I think you said, when you mentioned Baykeeper.
Yeah, in your previous slide, you had baykeepers?
Yes.
Okay. Does that have anything to do with the city's settlement with baykeepers for $100 million?
That is one and the same. Mm-hmm. Did everyone hear the question? I'm sorry, I didn't repeat it. He asked if the Baykeeper is the same Baykeeper that's related to the settlement agreement with the $100 million requirement.
And what is the timetable to satisfy that requirement?
The timetable we have to appropriate funds to implement $100 million in the project over a 10-year period.
Starting
2016 was the date that the agreement was executed.
You have 8 years left?
I think we actually have 10 years left, because we haven't started.
Right, and, yeah, it's basically 10 years.
Here.
And we'll talk about this a bit more in our next steps. We'll be going over at the end of the presentation, but the appropriation doesn't start at 2016, it actually starts around 2020, 2021, I believe. I'd have to look at the document a little bit more closely, but it doesn't start at the time of consent decree building.
Could you consider a couple of additional water sources? That would be dewatering water, because there's going to be so much building going on in an area that has high water table. So there's going to be a lot of dewatering, and that would be really valuable. And otherwise, I guess that's going to help with the storm drains as well. And also, there's other areas where there's high groundwater and it just seeps out. Like on 280 by 87, it's always wet right there, and there was a way to kind of capture that and use that kind of. And there's several other places like heard down by the airport. I haven't seen that by myself, but I've heard it.
If I follow the question, the question is, have you considered dewatering in these areas that have really high groundwater levels? Is that on point?
No, I'm asking if you could add to the plan to consider using those sources of water for these types of projects.
Okay, can we add to the plan using the source of water that you could gain from dewatering?
Yeah, that could be added as a source, because we mentioned stormwater and runoff from irrigation, and those are the only two I heard.
Okay, I'm going to try to start answering that question, but I think my colleague Jeff might have more to add. The green infrastructure plan is really focused both in the permit, we're focused on capturing the runoff from the urban areas that have a high level of impervious surfaces. We hadn't considered what you've presented here, but I do know that we do have some information about groundwater levels and how that can impact where we can put the green infrastructure or the design of the green infrastructure.
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit more. As Sharon mentioned, the focus is on stormwater, mainly because we're trying to intercept runoff that's picking up pollutants and other things that can degrade our environments. So with the groundwater tables, if they were to rise, like in the example of 280, and enter into the storm drain system, we would likely be capturing those flows as well. But as far as looking for additional flows, the intent of the plan is really just to capture those going in the storm drain system already, so that we're reducing the impacts to our creeks. So if those high groundwater tables aren't contributing to that, then those might not necessarily be the focus.
Okay, we can do one more and then we'll take other questions at the end.
Okay, on this plan that you're capturing these surface pollutants, they're gonna be built up in those basins or whatever that you're building to filter those out. Is there a plan to clean those out after they build up? Because if they don't go into the creek or anywhere else, they're gonna be built up right there in those spots in your building.
Okay, I understand the question, V, correct me if I'm wrong. Is there a plan to clean or maintain these treatment devices? Because we know that pollutants will be running into them. Is that your question?
That's correct.
Okay. So a part of this plan, and I don't want to get too far ahead because we'll be talking about this a little bit, but a part of this plan will include information on how we will inspect and maintain these devices. So I'd say yes, that is something, maintenance is definitely a part of the plan.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. So she gave a brief overview of what the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan, and now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on what that plan will include. This plan, as she mentioned, is partly a requirement under two regulatory drivers, and as such, there are some elements that we're required to include, and many of those are listed here. And so I'm going to run through these in more detail in the following slides. So starting with planning document coordination. So it's important that the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan is coordinated with other citywide planning documents to ensure that there's some continuity in those plans and they don't leave out the Green Stormwater Infrastructure elements, and that we don't leave out their elements as appropriate. So the stormwater permit requires that these relevant existing planning documents be updated to include green stormwater infrastructure language. As mentioned earlier, some of these plans already include these, and I'll go into more detail, but one of those is Climate Smart San Jose, and then also a Complete Streets Plan. So going into some of the examples, the city began taking steps to update these existing planning documents in advance of having this requirement, because we were aware of the importance of it and that the requirement was coming on board. So many of our plans already include green stormwater infrastructure language, including, for example, our urban village plans, which there are several. The example I have up in the top right there is of the Alameda Urban Village Plan. Stormwater language is included in 2 chapters of that document, and specifically includes the language that's shown here. As I mentioned, the city was taking the initiative early on and updated our general plan to also include updated language such that it would be supportive of the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan. Specifically, it states that the city should adopt a green streets plan that meets the permit requirements, and this plan will effectively meet that goal in the general plan. Another document that's important to update is our Complete Streets Plan. This was just recently developed, and through that development, the city made sure to include green stormwater infrastructure guidance in those right-of-way or street side design guidelines in the plan. And so now the Complete Streets Plans includes guidance on where these green stormwater features could be located and what types to select from. So now that we're focusing more on sustainable streets rather than just complete streets. Another planning element that we need to address, actually 2, are developing general streetscape designs that are inclusive of green stormwater infrastructure and guidance that can help us incorporate those. And I mentioned the Complete Streets Plan is one example of that, but the city actually has the luxury of referring to another document called the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Handbook. And so this is being developed by the Santa Clara Valley Urban Runoff Pollution Prevention Program. And so that's, we call that SCVRP, because that's a very long title. And so they're developing this document that will take the guidance a step further to specifically help municipalities deal with the constraints and challenges of incorporating green stormwater infrastructure in the right of way. This is an organization called SCVRP. It's called Santa Clara Valley Urban Runoff Pollution Prevention Program, and it's basically made up of all the municipalities in the South Bay county that coordinate together to implement provisions of our stormwater permit. It's
Who runs?
well, Jill, do you want to touch base on? Jill's kind of our representative of Traverse, so I think you better.
It's a countywide program that's basically an association of 13 cities, the county, and the water district that work together to jointly meet these permit requirements. And they have contracted out program management staff, that I'm one of the staff, and we try to produce guidance documents that can help all of the cities. So we are working on this handbook on behalf of the cities, and San Jose will be able to use it as part of their plan.
Who do you work for?
I work for the consulting firm EOA Incorporated, and we are the contract program managers for Skirop.
Thanks, Jill. Sorry to put you on the spot there. Easy one, okay, good. So, getting back on topic, the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Handbook, as she mentioned, we work together to meet these permit requirements, and this is going to actually meet two of them, and I mentioned one is the general design guidelines, and then also the second one is to develop typical details and specifications to help with the design and construction of green stormwater infrastructure projects. And so this handbook is broken up into two parts, and the first part addresses the first requirement, and the second addresses the second requirement. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail on what this document will include. Specifically, the first part has techniques to integrate green stormwater infrastructure into other functions of a streetscape, including the roadway, bike lanes, pedestrian facilities, and utilities, all of which could constrain GSI, but we can also work together to incorporate it. So there are often many goals being addressed in limited space on a roadway, and having this guidance on the types of green stormwater infrastructure and suitable locations can help planners incorporate green stormwater infrastructure and leverage the multiple benefits to meet other goals that might be going on in the street. So part two of the document is essentially going to be a compilation of typical details and specifications. And when I say typical details, one of them is kind of shown up here on the screen of bioretention, where it shows the different layers of the system and measurements. And these are typical. They're not necessarily going to be one size fit all, but this document is a jumping off point for planners and designers to use and modify based on the specific layout of the project or the specific needs. And so this document will include typical details for the most common types of green stormwater infrastructure facilities, many of which Sharon mentioned, but street side bioretention, permeable pavement systems, as well as systems that integrate trees, such as tree well filters. So the next part I'm going to talk about is project prioritization. This is an element that's required in the permit as well to have a mechanism in place to prioritize potential locations for projects. But I want to start off by introducing the Stormwater Resource Plan, because this was a document that helped as a jumping off point again for developing these processes. And this document was developed by SCVER in coordination with the Santa Clara Valley Water District as a required element to be eligible for state bond-funded implementation grants. So this allows us to be eligible for grant projects. And the other intent of this document was to help support municipalities in the South Bay develop their green stormwater infrastructure plans. And one of the ways that they did that was to develop a prioritization mechanism for identifying potential project opportunities for the project types that Sharon talked about earlier. Those are the regional projects, the green streets, as well as the LID parcel-based projects. And so they did that by identifying multi-benefit criteria and rating that criteria. So I'm going to go through those in detail on a project type, per project type basis. And I'm going to start with the regional projects, which Sharon described earlier as these parcel-based projects that capture from several neighborhoods. And so the Stormwater Resource Plan developed several attributes and assigned scores to them, such as ownership, the parcel size, slope, impervious areas in the surrounding area, and then also the soil types. And so these were all scored and put into categories of high, medium, and low. And you may be able to see on that map that there's a red, orange, and a yellow, and so red is the high scoring parcels, and orange and yellow are the medium and low. And so this was a kind of a first step to identifying potential areas that might be suitable for these regional projects. And then the city took a further step to evaluate some locations. And specifically, we analyzed our storm drain network to determine what the drainage areas would be for certain parcels. And so a drainage area, for example, would look like the picture on the right. It's highlighted in blue with the parcel being the green box at the bottom of that highlighted area. So we looked at the drainage network and the potential drainage areas, and then compared that to the site's specific geology, including the soil type and then the depth to groundwater. We also looked at the size of the parcel to determine if it would even be large enough to accommodate the drainage area that's going to it. And then following that drainage analysis, we also evaluated how the site could absorb such modifications that would include stormwater capture. It's important to take a look at these types of projects early on in a green stormwater infrastructure planning process because they have the potential for providing certain economies of scales and multiple benefits because of their size. And it also is important in locating the smaller projects of green streets or parcels that might be located in these drainage areas already, whereas the goal would likely be to get those projects located in areas outside of existing regional project drainage areas. So you're kind of taking on the big projects first and then filling in the gaps with the smaller ones. So as a result of this analysis, we identified 6 potential locations that green stormwater infrastructure projects may be feasible in. And concept designs are being developed for these projects, or locations rather, to see if we can have some further discussion on site selections. And the intent behind these projects would be to maintain the use that's on site. So for example, the River Oaks pump station is there, shown there on the screen, and that's an existing detention basin where parks would maintain the recreational uses. So for the River Oaks pump station, we're looking at a potential enhancement to that site to include not only flood detention, but also stormwater treatment on smaller events, and then opening up that area for potential passive recreation and access to the Guadalupe River Trail in coordination with the park adjacent to it. This is a map that shows the locations of some of the potential regional projects, and also shown are the green street projects that the city has actually already completed. Now, additional green street projects will be identified with a separate prioritization process, which I'm going to go through in this following slide. I'm also going to talk about the Stormwater Resource Plan low impact development prioritization process, but first, in talking about green streets, San Jose has a lot of them, or rather streets, and making them green streets is a few green streets, but not a lot of them at this point. So in planning green streets with such a large selection, it's important to try to whittle that selection down as much as possible. And so the Stormwater Resource Plan really took the first stab of it by analyzing street segments and providing rating criteria and scoring based on such attributes as street type, the surrounding imperviousness again, soil types, the slope of the street, as well as traffic speeds. And so this resulted in 2,000 street segments being identified as potentially high priority locations for projects. However, these were fairly high-level criteria, and in order to better identify green street opportunities, the city is developing a way to take a more construction feasibility-focused prioritization process. And do we have maps? Yep, so I'm getting to that right now, actually. So similar tools have been developed in San Francisco and Seattle. We're still developing our tool right now, so that's why I'm referencing the San Francisco maps, because I don't have any yet. But these tools have been developed elsewhere, and fortunately I had those to reference. And the output of these maps are what you see here. There are several maps that are built from geographic information system mapping tools and layers that go into those maps. And as a result, we'll have a map on infiltration feasibility, physical space constraints, as well as hydrologic performance. And as a result, these different street segments will be scored on those different attributes, and then you'll have a much smaller selection of potentially high priority green street locations. So there's more to come on that. That's still under development. As far as the low impact development, those parcel-based systems, the Stormwater Resource Plan incorporated the rating criteria for those with the regional project criteria. And so what we're doing is relying on a more opportunistic approach as we already evaluate our city facility updates for potential green stormwater infrastructure improvements on a yearly basis when we evaluate our capital improvement program. So we'll continue to do that as a city to see where there are opportunities to include green stormwater infrastructure, such as at this community center where we have several bioretention systems around the building, actually right outside that window. Yes, and there is an art feature out there as well that we're really proud of, the thumbprint that captures rainwater and filters it into the bioretention adjacent to it. So it's a really neat system. And so where those opportunities present themselves, the city will explore feasibility. So I've talked about designing projects and planning them and also prioritizing the locations, but at the end of the day, once we've constructed them, we need to keep track of them for a couple of reasons. One of which being our ability to identify our progress towards water quality improvements. So the requirement to track projects has actually been in place for some time with the stormwater permit, because we've had to track the projects that have included green stormwater infrastructure as part of their new and redevelopment activities. So as a result, we've developed a database to manage that tracking. But right now we're making updates to include additional attributes that we can track that will help us basically calculate our water quality improvement. And on the bottom right-hand corner is a graph of a potential display that could be included in the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan when it's complete, that will demonstrate the progress that we've made with the different types of projects. So each of those colors would represent one of those project types, whether it be a regional project, a Green Street project, or an existing developed project area. The other reason to keep track of these project locations is to ensure that they're maintained and operated properly. And this is actually a requirement that's in place currently and something we do and will continue to do. And so the city ensures maintenance is occurring through inspections of both private and public property. But to help further facilitate that maintenance, we're developing a green stormwater infrastructure maintenance handbook to help guide field staff on how to make sure that these systems are still operating properly and maintained. So this maintenance guideline will also help the city establish consistent standards for proper maintenance and enforcement, and then just further solidify how the city ensures green infrastructure will be maintained. So I've gone through the planning elements that I showed you on the original slide, including planning, document coordination, design and typical details, as well as our prioritization process that we coordinate with the Stormwater Resource Plan and have done internally, as well as our tracking and maintenance activities. So I want to give folks an opportunity to ask any other additional questions that you may have on the slides that I've just presented. And then following this question period, we're going to talk about next steps and scheduling. So if you have questions on that, you can hold it for that.
Yeah, I have a question regarding on the slides that you had showed. I think there were 6 different locations that you were considering. Kelly Park, Horse Stables, Kelly Park Disc Golf. Specifically the disc golf courses that you represent the Silicon Valley Disc Golf Club. If you do a development there at the Kelly Park Disc Golf Course, would that knock out the disc golf course, or would you be able to still play there?
The goal of all these projects will be to maintain the recreational uses, and we would coordinate with the parties that are working at that park or using those recreational facilities to make sure that recreational use can be maintained. Yep.
So this document should also have activate sanitation and park green recreation. Further to the Parks Department, let the Parks Commission know about these things.
Sure. Yes. On the planning document side, it was mentioned that the Activate SJ, which is currently under development, could be included as well. And so part of this is, I should mention, this isn't a comprehensive list because many of our documents are under development and some of the urban village plans are just represented as an urban village plan here. But yeah, there we have other city documents that we are looking at including in.
You're attacking the city parks, you need to work with that.
And yeah, so that would be one of those documents. Yes.
How do you design and manage these systems so that they don't have mosquitoes? We now at West Nile virus, we're likely to get, because the climate is warmer, we're going to have more vector-borne diseases. And I can see that this could be challenging to not get more mosquitoes.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's one. As I mentioned, these have been in place. A lot of these facilities have been in place for many years, and it's something that we've had to think about. So, the soils that we use in these systems are typically a special mix of sand and compost, and they actually drain very quickly. And so, the purpose of these designs are to drain such that they are no longer holding any standing water within about 48 hours.
My concern is on the structure of the devices and the impact it would have around children, because you put up Tully ball fields, that encompasses a library, an elementary school. How will that device impact the children at play and the ballpark itself? I'm assuming the answer is going to be similar to the golf course, but difference with the children in particular.
Yeah, so, yeah, I'll repeat the question. Sorry, I've forgotten to do that. So this particular question is regarding the Tully ball fields, similar to the other gentleman's question, but regarding impacting the use, but specifically that site's use with children on the Tully ball fields, because they do have some Little League fields out there. So this is something that we'll be exploring as we go through designs of these projects, because it's very early on, but we would be considering that in coordination with our constituents and through the design.
So currently you don't have a device that is or has been tested or challenged in that kind of environment?
In San Jose,
Around children?
not that I know, no. I mean, well, these are all, I mean, these devices are throughout our city. In a lot of different, they're actually already in our parks, in the parking lots, and in some of the other park facilities. We have these green stormwater infrastructure pieces.
Just to add on to what he was saying about Tully ball fields, will you have, if you don't have a design yet, will you have the community be able to take a look at design prior to implementing your designs?
Yes, so I think we're going to talk about that a bit more in the next steps. Oh, I'm so sorry. So the question was, doing a really bad job with that. Will the community have an opportunity to look at those designs once they're developed? Yes. I'm going to get some other folks.
Along those design lines, the examples that you have up here, if you all take a look at the Tanner Springs design in Fort Hood, Oregon, that design was designed by DreamWorks PC in Germany, a studio that hires artists. It's really smart, beautiful design. And all of these designs are going to be going into the major public spaces. And I'm curious, as part of that process, is there somebody involved, are there artists that are going to be involved that really enhance the visual capacity of these? Looking at that from there, that doesn't look like an artist was involved.
So creating an art feature along with
Integrated into the design.
right. So art perspective.
So I'll repeat the question. So in looking at these regional project opportunities or other green infrastructure opportunities, are we going to be incorporating someone to provide input on artistic opportunities to include in these projects?
Like a collaboration between artists and landscape architects. So it's really the thought processes that go into creating a cohesive design. And I just stated Tanner Springs because that's the most visual example of it that we have right here. The piece you mentioned outside on Jackie Brook there, that also has that was an artist design feature. You also showed the watershed earlier, an earlier slide by Peter Richards, who's another artist. So I'm just curious if there's like this is going to be a major. These are all the major visual integrations into the urban environment. Is there going to be consideration given to how that looks?
Well, fortunately, so is there going to be consideration into how these look, considering landscape architects, including artists and landscape architects? Fortunately, we're really early on in the process, so I would say that we would be considering those. But as we move forward into the design phases, we would have to explore that on probably a project-by-project basis. But it's definitely a consideration.
I noticed all those areas that are public use, recreational areas. Have you people ever considered the areas that aren't used for public or developed for public use for such a thing?
Yeah, so the question is, pointing to the screen, these are all public areas. Has the city considered areas that aren't publicly used? River Oaks Pump Station would be one example, but other examples that we've considered are potential opportunities under parking lots or those types of areas. Really, it was limiting on the space that's needed for capturing this amount of stormwater, which limits the options we have for locations. But we did consider other locations that weren't as actively publicly used. But the goal is to also incorporate public use and make sure that there's that educational component as well, and try to include multi-benefits, which is actually an element of our grant funding sources. So I've got a question in the back there, sir. At this point, we've only been focusing on city-owned facilities, but we would be considering those other, coordinating with those other agencies as well. That's a good question. It's going to be really on a case-by-case basis because it depends on the amount of drainage area that's going to it. So in the picture on the right, that blue area, as that blue area varies, the amount of space that needed would be variable as well. That would not be the intent. The intent would be to incorporate. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so the first part of that question was the area. Okay, so what's the area needed for these types of projects? For example, a small parking lot or the size of a building. It's going to be larger than that in many cases. So the area that's needed, though, is going to be variable based on the amount of drainage that's going to the site.
And the last thing is if you're taking parkland and using it for some other purpose, you have to go to the voters to change that. You have to get the voters to approve these and state the land.
Yeah, so I think the goal will be to maintain recreational uses.
But if it's fenced off,
Oh, sorry. If in making changes to these parts, the comment was that we need to go to the voters. So
Are they fenced or not?
it depends on the design, but I don't think that they would be fenced in many cases.
the soil and the muddy and the lost the ability to use parkland. I know that when you took part of the city park and that fire station, you need the voter people to approve that.
Yes, so we would definitely be coordinating those efforts. Oh yeah, it's the same comment that we would need to go to the voters to use parkland.
Yeah, you can't walk around, unfortunately. Sorry about that, but I can try and help with that. Sorry, Jeff, I know we're on your case now.
Just keep telling me.
It's just, we can't move the microphone, so thank
Sorry.
you for bearing with us.
Thanks for being patient.
I'm curious about what's going to be done for mitigation of the existing waterways and storm drains for plastics capture, that kind of thing.
So the question was.
Is that even part of this?
So the question was, curious to know what's being done for mitigation on the existing water areas and for plastics and those types of things. So, I was going to address that.
So these stormwater features, like bioretention, they can capture trash, but there's another effort that the city is implementing where we're actively working to capture trash. We've installed in a number of areas these underground systems that capture, they're called hydrodynamic separators or continuous dynamic separators. The water can run through and trash is captured. And again, those are maintained. They have to be periodically maintained and remove the trash that is captured. So it's definitely something that we're thinking about, but it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all. These devices can't fit everywhere. And I should also mention, just because we're talking about the green stormwater infrastructure, this is not what I'm talking about in terms of these trash devices. That is not part of the green stormwater infrastructure. So green stormwater infrastructure can help capture trash, but there's a larger effort underway to deal with all the trash that's going into the storm sewer system.
And what is that? What was that larger thing
It's called a hydrodynamic separator. They're large units that are installed underground, and they intercept water that's flowing through the storm sewer system, and then separates the trash out, so it captures it. The question, as I heard it, is who's maintaining the current green infrastructure and how much staff will we need to hire to address these additional projects? So okay, all right. So the easy part is who's inspecting, well, sort of easy part of it, as far as who's inspecting it now. We have a team of inspectors within ESD, Environmental Services Department, that goes out to inspect stormwater treatment measures. However, there is some interdepartmental coordination where we are collecting information from some of the departments that have those devices on site. So it's a collaborative, I like to think of it that way. And then in terms of the new projects, that's a good question, and I don't have a numeric answer for you, but generally I can say that that's something that we have to evaluate. We all know that if we build something, we have to take into consideration that it needs to be maintained. And so as we put forth projects and identify funding, we also need to consider funding for maintenance. So that's something on the radar for sure. I think that's something we're still discussing internally, but conceptually, actually, part of it's already happening. Our transportation department has hired a contractor that is helping with the maintenance of treatment measures that they're maintaining. And I'm not sure if Thomas is here. He might want to add. Thomas, do you want to add anything to that? Okay, all right. So the model that would, I think would work. The model that we have in place is probably the model that would work best. So it's a combination. And I think that's something that we need to discuss in detail internally, but conceptually, as I said, we need to as we are developing the devices, we need to discuss and figure out the budgeting for maintenance. Okay.
We can take a couple more now, and then we'll finish up the presentation and come back to questions.
So I have kind of a two-part question. Do you expect that these projects will be capturing runoff on a regular basis, like from irrigation and car wash and so on, rather than just seasonal when there's storms? And if it's going to be regular throughout the year, then how can you be sure that the park areas will still be usable if there's constantly water running into them and you have dampness and environment?
So, the question, I was going to restate it actually. No, the question was, are we going to have, is it just going to be capturing stormwater flows which occur during the rainy season, or is it going to capture flows throughout the year from other uses like irrigation and car washes? I think those actually go to the sanitary system, which the washing, yeah. But yeah, so those dry weather uses. So the answer to that is somewhat depend on the project. So we don't know. We'd have to explore that further. But there are ways to do that. So you can actually take a look at the flows that are going through the pipes during the dry season to see if that's occurring, and then plan your project accordingly. But it would be based on a project by project basis.
So, and then the second half was, if you do have sort of water running in your park area, you need to make sure that the area that's used is dry enough to be usable. You can't have it wet all the time.
So the other part of that question was, if we do have it dry weather flows and it's running through the park, that those would need to be used. Well, they would need to be designed such that those areas can be used. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that these areas just need to be designed with that in mind. So, go right behind you.
Are you going to prioritize stormwater reuse? Do you have a sort of hierarchy of uses in mind? Are you thinking of prioritizing reuse before other things or recharge?
So the question was, do we have prioritized uses in mind, such as water reuse in particular? At this point, no, we haven't really prioritized any one use over the other. There's benefits to infiltrating the flow. There's also benefits to reusing that. And the reuse aspect somewhat is dependent on the supply. So if we have dry weather flows, for instance, we can use those all year round. So it would likely depend on the project, but it's been something we've been considering though, as those different uses. So, yeah, got some in the back here.
Take one more and then we'll still have that.
Okay, so we'll take one more.
And we'll still come back to all of them.
Okay.
So the question is, how is this funded? So that's a great question, and I'm surprised it's taken so long for someone to ask it. The answer is that we're still working on. I mean, we mentioned that the first set of projects, the $100 million worth of projects that we need to do. We haven't identified the fundings. That's something that we're working on. So stay tuned.
Real quick on that, what you just mentioned, if the funding was $100 million,
Yes.
is that solely going to stormwater runoff, or is it also going to clean up the creeks?
Okay. The question is that 100 million solely for this green infrastructure, or is it also going to clean up the creeks? The 100 million is specifically for green infrastructure. However, you're familiar with the consent decree. There is a requirement to address the trash in the creeks.
The bacteria in the trash.
Yes, you got it. Yeah, so that's additional. Thank you. So I think we're wrapping the questions for the moment, but we'll be right back. We just have one more slide to finish up here. I lost control of the mic a little bit. Okay, we wanted to close the presentation portion of the session just highlighting some of our next steps and giving you some estimated time frames. So we don't have a draft plan, which was stated at the beginning of our time together yet. So we're working on it, and the plan is to post the draft plan on the internet and give people the public a chance to provide some comments to us. And again, as Michelle mentioned, if you're interested in getting notifications or updates on the green infrastructure plan, when you signed in, there was a box you could check to receive updates. So if you'd like to receive those updates, please make sure that box was checked by your name. And then the next step beyond that, in June 2019, we plan to present the draft green stormwater infrastructure plan to the Transportation and Environment Committee for their consideration and feedback. And the following month, take it to council for consideration and hopefully approval, because we have a permit requirement to submit the green stormwater infrastructure plan to the Water Board, the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board, by September 30th of 2019. And so going out beyond that, so this is not the end when we submit this plan. Then we'll move into the project implementation stage. So we estimate the time frame to be between 2020 and 2025, when we would be seeking specific public input on the specific projects. And just to note, I mean, there will be multiple projects. They're not all going to be done in one. It will be a phase type of approach. And then in 2022, that's our estimated earliest date that we would actually begin construction on one or more of these projects. So that concludes the presentation portion. Any other questions that you have, sir?
Yes, I'm wondering, you said a few years down the road before you have public meetings on what's going to be done. Does that mean you're going to have to already decided on the site, decided on the plan before you even bring it up to the public anymore? By that time, we sure would like to see that as a formality to the public rather than being involved in the plan
Okay.
of these sites.
So the question is, it's a couple years out. Is it a couple years out before the public will be able to provide any input on the plan? And the answer is no. You'll have an opportunity to provide input on the plan. We'll be posting the draft in the March to April timeframe. And so that's an opportunity for you to provide some feedback.
That only gives you 5 or 6 months till September.
That's right, it is a crunch timeline.
That doesn't make sense. We should start this process now. You're talking about a very huge infrastructure project with only $100 million. How are you gonna clean up the creeks, the trash, get rid of the homeless that keep creating the bacteria through the fecal matter? How do you do all that? Plus your storm runoff program.
So the question is, how are you going to get this plan finished by September when you have all of these other issues like cleaning up trash and
That you
dealing
haven't
with
addressed.
I'm sorry?
You haven't addressed the trash problem in the creek.
We're working on it. Yeah.
Well, actually, we do. We volunteer to go down there. We work on it. We pull out tons of garbage every couple of months. But it gets put back there again and again because you allow a population to live there and dispose of and discard whatever they have in the creek. That is a huge source of your problem.
I don't have the fix-all answer, but what I can tell you is that it is something that a lot of discussion is going on among multiple city departments to try and figure out how we can do our best with the resources that we have.
The reason you got sued in the first place was due to that problem. Why not address that first?
I don't want to leave that question, so I'm sorry, we're turning into a conversation here, and let me just repeat the question. The question is, since you have the homeless encampments and the garbage going into the creeks, why not address that first? I think we have to, and my answer, and please, my colleagues, please feel free to jump in. What I think I can say about that is I think we have to address multiple things at one time because we have these issues. I agree with you, they're very pressing, but we also have regulatory deadlines that we have to meet, so we have to kind of multitask.
That should be
I had a question, a couple. One around what the thing that we address the sources of these issues in this planning process. It seems like San Jose is looking for green space to deal with a housing crisis, and those both contribute to these specific contaminants. So, is there a plan to integrate all the urban development toward the smart San Jose community into this planning process, given the time constraints? And then the second piece around, it looked like in the prioritization, it was, very methodical as far as landscape, but are there communities that are more in need within San Jose green infrastructure, and also, how is that being prioritized, and what communities are in the room in these meetings, and are the communities that are going to be affected most or being left out, being reached out to in these processes? So 2 questions.
I think I caught that, but so I'm going to restate it. Yeah, please feel free to correct me if I misinterpret it. So we have some smart growth and urban development that's occurring and a housing issue associated with that. And so there's an overarching strategic plan to deal with that. And how does this coordinate with that effort? Okay. So I think they're not necessarily separate. We, as development occurs, those projects in many cases are required to incorporate green stormwater infrastructure on site, but they don't necessarily we don't necessarily require those on existing property to address any existing issues. But as new and redevelopment occurs, they are required to incorporate green stormwater infrastructure on site. So I think that's kind of the nexus that I can see with that. Then the next part of the question was the different communities. So are there certain communities that are in need of these systems more than others? And I think, if so, how are we planning on coordinating those, or locating those? So this is really, that's a good question. You know, it's a kind of an early stage in this process, and we haven't identified any specific communities just yet that are particularly in need of these additional stormwater facilities. I mean, anecdotally, where development occurs, we know that these will be included on those change in properties and alterations to the property, but evaluating this on a citywide scale based on the different needs of the communities is something that we haven't done just yet.
Sounds like you're gonna choose some regional project or projects, I don't know how many. Is the plan also gonna identify specific streets? And is it also gonna identify some green roof projects? Or other on-site projects? Smaller on-site projects?
So I'm going to try to repeat the question, and we heard it. The first is, how does CEQA fit into this? That's question one. And then the second part is, you talked about regional green infrastructure projects. What about green streets and green roof opportunities? Did I capture that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And smaller site stuff like here.
Okay. So in terms of CEQA, we are in discussions with our planning department, so to make sure that we take the necessary steps to address those requirements. So I don't have a lot of detail for you on that, but that's where we are. And then Jeff's going to answer the second part of that question.
Okay, so for will this plan identify green street opportunities? As of right now, I don't know for sure. We will be identifying our prioritization process, but I'm not sure that we'll actually have results with specific streets identified in that plan. And then as far as the smaller, more parcel-based sites, I don't anticipate us identifying those specifically because we're evaluating those kind of on an annual basis as we make updates to our public parcels. But for private parcels, we would be basically capturing those through those requirements I described earlier. And as far as green roofs go, we don't have any that will likely be planned as part of this plan, but there are some private projects that are doing them. So, but none that will be proposed that I can foresee as part of this plan. So,
Since this is such a complex issue, has the city manager convened an interdepartmental team that's going to coordinate all this? And if such a team is convened, I believe the aesthetic aspect of everything we're doing will be forgotten. This is important.
Okay, I heard, has the city manager established an interdepartmental team to address this complex issue? And the second part, you hope that, you would like for us to, have we included, or how are we going to include the art aspect of this? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The first, response to the first question is yes, there is an interdepartmental team that includes planning, public works, I'm going to forget someone, parks and transportation, and I believe we recently added the Office of Cultural Affairs. I'll stop there because I'm. Okay.
I'm gonna start going to those.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for confirming that. Am I forgetting any other department? There are quite a few departments. And then in terms of ensuring that we consider the artistic aspect of this, I think someone else mentioned that, so I'm hearing that is becoming a theme. So we have not as of yet, but it's something that we can take back to those discussions. I think you next.
I just have a quick question. It sounds like the capture, the stormwater capture is a couple of things. It's capturing the filtering it, right? And then reusing it. And then is it also allowing the rainwater or the stormwater to just infiltrate into the soil and into the groundwater?
Yes, so the question was, it sounds like in some cases these treatment measures capture the water, and that's correct. And then does it also allow the groundwater or the water to infiltrate? And the answer is yes. There are different types and different ones function different ways. But yes, as much to the extent we can, we want infiltration to happen. It was mentioned earlier that in some cases the we might have situations where we can't facilitate the infiltration, but we can capture the water. So, but in other cases, we can infiltrate, and that's our ultimate objective.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and restate that. So the question was regarding soil analysis and whether we were going to look at the soil chemistry of the sites and how that would impact our designs. And maybe I misspoke earlier or wasn't clear. When I mentioned that we'll be taking consideration of the soil, really we're looking at it from pretty much just one factor, and that's the permeability or infiltration rate of that soil. So we've taken a look at there's different sources like USGS and others that have broad overviews of the Bay Area's soil types, and they're kind of categorized by A, B, C, or D. And those A soils have very fast draining soils, whereas the D are less. So we're going to be evaluating the soils based on those, based on that property of just how fast the water can infiltrate, because that can impact the design. But the soil chemistry itself, that wasn't something that we were necessarily going to explore. Yeah. So that's a good question. I'll restate it. Is there any plan to try to improve the existing soil structures because of the importance that the soil biology has on this water quality? So, in some cases, we will be adding in soil amendments. For instance, with the River Oaks pump station, we would likely put in some type of amended soil. The stormwater regulations actually specify a special type of soil that's made up of sand and compost that is intended to help facilitate infiltration, but also filter out pollutants and support plant life. And so we would likely be relying on that soil media type in many of these projects to help stay within bounds of our permit requirements.
Okay, so we're actually over time, but maybe we can take a couple more.
I'm still unclear how this plan that applies to private development. One approach might be, well, private development and the ordinances and development standards all completely different. I've done this before. This plan has, guidelines or standards or goals that then get applied in review of the city's development ordinances, development standards to ensure that these kinds of things get done on private development. How does that relate?
Sure. So the question was, this plan, since this plan is primarily focused on the public realm, the right of way, and public properties, how does it integrate the private properties and address those specifically with like design guidelines and that type of thing? So fortunately, private development, it's the purpose of the green infrastructure plan is focused primarily on the public realm because that's a gap that hasn't really been addressed yet. Whereas the private realm, actually, we've been working with for quite some time now, over a decade, to incorporate these features onto new development sites and redevelopment sites. And so there are existing ordinances in place at the city, and there is the regional permit that we have. And then we also have regional guidance documents and city standards and specifications that we make available to private developments and work with them. So this plan will be filling in the gap that's not addressed there. Yeah.
So the connection between the storm sewers and the creeks, are you going to reroute the sewer pipes back to certain places, or are you going to have dozens of these things, or are you just going to do these for just a few larger ones?
So the question is, our storm drain network has many connections to the creeks, and so are we going to connect them together somehow? So I think the answer is that we will be working likely within just the drainage infrastructure that we have, with maybe some minor retrofits to direct it into a regional facility. But the goal is to not to do a lot of work of rerouting. No, we likely won't capture all of the stormwater, and that I don't think is really the intent. But to capture an amount such that we would be making an improvement to the water quality and meeting stormwater goals.
Okay, well, we are, I see that the people are getting up and they're starting to move, so we do need to wrap. But I just want to remind you that we will, make all of these question and answers available when we start to post the meeting video and everything online. And we will notify you if you've given us your email. We will add you to the interested parties list and keep you apprised as plans, updates, and meetings are scheduled. So please make sure that we have that information, and you can continue to provide questions and input into the process. And we just want to thank you all for being here tonight and kicking off this conversation. And we will be around here if there are other questions you'd like to add. So thank you very much, and have a great evening.